So let's talk some more about separating Chroma and Luma and why you may want to and what the benefits are, etc. So we're going to run through some of the actions here on actions 12. We're going to go in order and run some of the direct ones that, you can modify Chroma directly, you can modify Luma directly. Okay, they don't actually do anything initially, but you can play with it. Let's start with adjust Chroma plus Luma color. Okay, color meaning the blending mode it's going to use, right? So let's hit that. I can remind you, of course, you got to be on a flattened layer or the background. There we go. Nothing's changed, but it's set up. Let's walk you through this because this is important to understand what the rest of the actions, how they can be leveraged. So if we come here to the Luma, hold down Alt or Option and click the eyeball, we can see this is our Luma layer. As a reminder, it's not just a desaturated version. It's actually been created with a 50% gray layer, set to color blending mode, and then flattened because that's a true Luma extraction. Desaturation is not true. It's not quite perfectly accurate Luma extraction. So this one does it accurately. The Chroma layer, as we've talked about in other videos, can be a little bit esoteric looking, but this is just pure color, hue information, okay? Set to, it's a little difficult to understand, but it's very important that you understand what it's doing, at least the basics of it. Manipulating it is where it gets a little bit tricky, and we have that in other videos. This is more about some sort of direct things you can do. So let's turn that back off. Okay, so let's see what the default settings on this Chroma Luma split has done. Okay, so we have everything clipped down. That is, this curves layer called Luma curves is clipped down to the Luma only, as is Luma brightness and contrast. They're clipped down so they only affect the Luma. What that means is that if I move the curves up and down, I'm brightening and darkening the image, but I'm not going to get any weird colors, spill over because I'm not manipulating Chroma, just Luma. Can this be done with a curves layer in luminosity mode? Yes, but in my testing, it's not quite as accurate. This is a little bit better. On top of that, you can keep stacking layers on top of this. Here's brightness and contrast. I can add contrast without messing with the Luma, without messing with the Chroma. I can reduce the contrast without messing with the Chroma, etc. Now the Chroma has the same thing, has a clip down layer, okay? It's a hue set layer. So I can come in and I can take saturation up, I can take the saturation down, I can change the hue a little bit. Don't forget, I can go straight to the ranges. I can go to red and I can shift the reds around a little bit. I can go to the cyans and let's shift those radically and go to the blues and shift that radically. So you can see our sky became cyan, but we're manipulating only Chroma. It doesn't seem like it's obvious until you've done this on layers that aren't separated by Chroma and Luma, because it's a lot cleaner, a lot more of a finessed result. Now on top of that, I can add something else. So you have to be careful what you can add, but let's go ahead and add like a color balance. We have to hold down Alt or Option and clip it down. Want to make sure it affects that. Okay, we don't affect everything. It's just a good practice to get into because depending on your workflow, you may have things underneath or whatever. You may not want to affect them. So clip it down to the Chroma layer. Now we can roll in colors into our mid-range. So we can make it more pink and more red and maybe a little more blue, etc. And now went from that to that. Now the whole thing went from this to this. Is very, very subtle. But when you start playing with this, or if you have played with manipulating colors and contrast at the same time, you have noticed that things shift and you're kind of fighting yourself. So if you come back to the contrast and boost it, when you boost the contrast this way, all the color things you did up top, they're not shifted. They don't get more saturated. They don't get less saturated. They stay exactly where you left them, but your contrast is increased. Come back to your curves, you can brighten and darken it again. Your saturation of your Chroma shifts have not changed. It's a very, very clean way to make those changes. Now, that's just one of the settings. Let's go ahead and delete that whole folder, okay? Because we also have adjust Chroma color hue set, okay? Let me explain what that one does, all right? So we'll turn that one on, okay? This is simply just Chroma, okay? And then you can change hue set. The blending mode is set to color, which is very relevant because when the blending mode is set to color, which it has to be color or hue, so you can do the split of the Chroma, okay? We have a hue and saturation layer. Right now, hue makes a difference. And of course, any of the settings, red, any specific colors, that makes a difference. But curiously, saturation also makes a difference. And the reason why I say curiously, because sometimes we want to do that, especially when we're painting, which is another video as well. But sometimes we want to do that and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we want to make shifts and not do it. Let's delete this one because the next one, okay, called adjust Chroma hue and saturation, this sets the blend mode of the Chroma layer to hue. That means that our hues work, our shifting around of hues work, but saturation does nothing. If you go all the way to the left, it'll go gray. That's just because you clipped out. But saturation does nothing because we're on hue mode. That's relevant to know. And sometimes it's relevant in your workflow. So that's why you want either a color or hue. Yeah, you can change the blend mode right here, just manually. But why not have an extra action just in case, you know, you're familiar and you know which one you're going to want, or you want to test and see, right? Then we have adjust chroma color paint. This is where things start getting a little bit abstract, and I want to explain it to you. We also have a hue one as well. Let's go to color, hit OK. Now we have the chroma extracted, okay? And we have a blank layer clipped down, and we also have a mask on it. This is important for the workflow related actions that are related to all of this in the same pack. They're up here, the top 5, which is another video as well. But let's talk about what it does. Let's zoom in a little bit here, kind of take a look. All right, so it's not a perfectly sharp shot, but that's all right. We have a layer on top that's blank. If we take a paintbrush, I'm gonna make it like a 20% flow, okay? And I'm gonna choose, I'm gonna hold down Option and select, hold down Option or Alt and select the skin tone like there, okay? If I were to paint with this skin tone everywhere, I'm replacing all of the chroma, as you can see, okay? You might think, neat, that's kind of useless and there's other ways to do it. Yeah, but here's the deal. If we start working with this in a way to balance skin tone, it can be very, very powerful. And not just skin tone, but lots of other things. So for example, see all the blue in here? Let's say we want the sunglasses to be blue. We could create a hue and saturation layer, turn it on colorize, shift to the blue tones, find it, mask it in. Or we can come straight here, choose a blue tone, something mid, and paint the sunglasses. And now the sunglasses are all the blue tone. And I don't have to create another layer to do this balancing act of tone, of hue, right? I can finish all of that. There you go. Now my sunglasses are blue. Cool. And then I can change the, you know, let's make it to like a 15% flow. And then here I'm also going to choose a medium skin tone, and I'm going to paint over everything here up top to balance the skin tone a little bit, get rid of some of the blotchiness and the yellows and whatnot. Now the difference is that if I take a medium range skin tone, that can be any color at all, but a medium range skin tone, and I paint into the shadows, it can start shifting and getting a little bit on the oversaturated side, which is not uncommon. But if you look at this red shadows in here, if I take this yellow tone here and I replace it, do you see how it does work? And I'm doing this I'm doing it sloppily, and I'm not masking. But as you can see, I did replace the red tone and the gray, red, or whatever with the skin tone that I wanted. But I got a lot of saturation in it. The difference is, if I were to have set this up with hue on my chroma layer, now when I paint, I'm only giving it the tone. So it's going to make it all even. The more and more I paint, it'll make it all the same, but it's not boosting the saturation. You may or may not want either one, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Let me switch it back to color. See that? It increases the saturation. Hue does not. Now, if we're in color mode and we want to reduce the saturation of certain areas, this is where it gets a little strange. You can paint with black. I'm going to do like a 5% flow. You can paint with black and reduce saturation. You can paint with white and reduce saturation. So while you're painting, and this is going to be relevant, like I said, in your workflow versions of this, you can manipulate color in different ways. It gets a little bit strange because when you're in this mode, when you have chroma separated and you're trying to modify the chroma with painting like this, you need to exist and live in the mid-range only. The lower you get in the luminosity range and the higher you get in luminosity range, the more desaturating of an effect you can get. You want to live sort of in the mid-tones, which is great, because if you are painting like in frequency separation, which I've said in other videos, if you're painting skin tone, I always say, hey, make sure you resample constantly, because you want to blend in the colors nice, because that's literal. That's whatever color you set, you paint with it between the frequency layers. Here it's just tone. So it's very, very important that you pick a nice mid-range and work with it. If I chose this red on her dress, let's go back to our color layer, red on her dress and paint on her head, well, yeah, I get red. That makes sense. If I choose blue on her sunglasses, and I get blue. But when you're working in like areas, like-minded colors areas, similar colored areas, you can start feeling like, oh, I'm omnipotent. I can make everything even. For one, don't overdo it. And two, understand that when you're in this blend mode, when you have chroma extracted, and you're in this blend mode, it's very, very important that you understand how that works. Now, the reason why I have a layer clipped down is because you could paint directly on the chroma layer, but I'd rather have the option of changing my mind. And on top of that, I also have a mask. So if you make a selection, or you make a painted area and you like it, but you just need to clean it up a little bit. So some of the spillover that I was painting, I fix it real quick with a mask, just like I do on frequency separation painting. And you can make these differences. So now the sunglasses are blue, and there's a better tone across her everywhere. Now, better part. I should have done this separately and I didn't. I can make a new layer and clip it down and keep working with that. And I can paint over here, for example. Let's go back to like a 20% flow. Paint over here, get her arm all the same color, relatively speaking, tone it down. And if it's too strong, then I can change the opacity of that layer. And I can keep creating clipped layers to modify the chroma. Great for balancing, great for balancing. Really exaggerated, strong color shifting is great for that too. But when it comes to skin tone balancing or just balancing of colors in general, painting onto a chroma layer clipped down like this is super powerful. It's just a little different because it's not literal. You don't just pick a color and paint with it and you get it. Again, if you pick a dark color, you get a desaturating effect, etc. But it's very, very powerful in specific cases. And again, also in a skin retouch workflow, which you'll see in other videos. But I wanted to show what you can do when you separate chroma. Now, the other option next to it is the hue one, which we already did it by switching to hue, so we don't have to worry about that. It's no big deal. But let's talk about some of the Luma now. So adjust Luma tri-range con. Let's run that. This is pretty straightforward, but again, the Luma that was extracted was done smartly. It wasn't done with desaturation. It's true Luma, okay? Now let's look what we have. We have 3 different layers, and they're all brightness and contrast. So if I hold down Option or Alt and look at the mask, this is the shadows, mid-range, and highlights, okay? So it's pretty straightforward. I can, oops, turn that off. I can come here to the shadows, and I can increase the contrast of just the shadows. I can go to the highlights, and I can brighten them. And the mid-range, I can take the contrast down for whatever reason, okay? So it went from that to that, letting us do contrast, direct contrast adjustments to the Luma in the different ranges of the Luma. Yeah, you can do this in all kinds of other ways, but this is just a quick one in case, if your thought is, I really want to change the contrast of the shadows, I want to, run this. So let me run it again real quick. Tri-range, because it's a deep, high contrast shot. Run the tri-range, go to the shadows and turn down the contrast. Look at that. Now we've softened our shadows a bit without losing our dynamics in their other ranges. Very, very important when you look at the situation and know how you want to fix it. The chroma layer's up here on color, and you can add layers to it and you can do things to it just like we did a second ago if you really want, but it's necessary to separate chroma and Luma. All right, next one, Luma curves. Pretty straightforward, same story, but now it's just curves. In case you need to make some brightness or contrast adjustments to your chroma directly with curves, you like curves, you can do it that way, okay? Makes sense? Just a quick little simple one for just direct Luma. Go ahead and let that run again because I didn't actually mean curves. Levels. Just to show you, we have levels as well. So you could change the settings, of course, only on Luma. Again, true Luma, so it's a lot more accurate. Okay, so I love that. So those are some ways to mess with, chroma and Luma in direct ways, and you can keep modifying. You can stack more adjustment layers. You can choose the regular straightforward ones that are on top, which we talk about in another video, and then do anything you want to modify chroma in Luma. I know it's a little bit strange, but as you start playing with it with the same idea you might have now in your workflow, like I want this more contrast and I want this red less saturation. Yes, but now we're splitting chroma and Luma, giving us more control if we do it right and a more seamless result.